In order to truly highlight how bad this encounter is with its pacing and other designs, let's go over the water room area from Resident Evil 4 OG. In Resident Evil 4 OG, the water room was the worst room in the game. There wasn't a lot of thought with the number of enemies, the way they were placed, and the steps you had to go through to get through the room. A lot of people just try to kill all the enemies, but the game spawns more enemies if you do this. I've seen many people sit in the pressure plate room and just wait for the enemies to bust through the door and shoot them with the shotgun. And based on the fact that there's an enemy spawn point in the ceiling of this room, it gives the impression that this is what the developers want you to do, but I don't see how. I'm sure you can imagine how draining, soulless, laborious, and mindless such a method is. It felt like the developers shot themselves in the foot with a lot of the designs in this water room, based on how much the core gameplay loop really starts to feel artificial, and you start to see the numbers and the code that holds this game together. When it gets to that point, that's really where a section's designs fall flat. And with the enemy types, there were flail guys, shield guys, guys who can transform, and crossbow guys. The crossbow guys in particular made a huge difference in how you had to approach the sequence. It felt like the sequence demanded the use of the sniper rifle, particularly the semi-auto rifle, given how quickly the crossbow guys could shoot you. You also had to navigate Ashley into the pressure plate room so that you could make progress, and that could spawn additional enemies too. The main point I'm trying to make here is that there was clearly a lot of confusion with the designs here and with what the developers were expecting you to do. I remember in some of my earlier playthroughs of Resident Evil 4 OG, I would use a grenade to kill most of the enemies, but not all of them, so that the reinforcements wouldn't spawn in. Then, I would immediately run into the pressure plate room, activate the pressure plates, get an enemy to grab onto Ashley so that they would take her back to the entrance of the room, stop that enemy before they got away, then get through the door to trigger the passive checkpoint to save my progress. This, of course, came with all sorts of problems. These days, the new strategy I use is far more effective, and it definitely helps in providing a sense of pace and a sense of strategy to the sequence. It still doesn't remove how confused the designs of this area are, but it certainly made the sequence far more tolerable and more enjoyable. For my strategy, I would aim a grenade all the way up and throw it to kill most of the enemies, but not all of them, then go back through the door to trigger a passive checkpoint. Once I re-entered the room, I would back up 3 steps to make the left crossbow guy not shoot me. I would then kill this particular ganado, as he tends to be in the way when I'm escorting Ashley. If you hit this guy 5 times, rather than run downstairs, he'll come for you, and without the crossbow guys getting in the way, I can kill him with the pistol. You have to only kill this guy. Killing any more will spawn reinforcements. Once he was dead, I would then reset the room and start running on the right-hand side. I would enter the pressure plate room, activate the pressure plates, take Ashley with me, deal with any enemies blocking my way, hug the right-hand side since the helmeted ganado always points, deal with any enemy in the way, avoid the crossbow bolts, and get through the door. Whenever you re-enter the room after activating the pressure plates, the enemies in the middle of the room will not attack you unless you get close to them or make noise. Also, the kill threshold that spawns in reinforcements is raised a bit, allowing you to kill off more enemies before reinforcements spawn in. Upon entering the room, there will be a guy that emerges from the right side door. Run past him, take cover, and try to finish him off, preferably with the suplex as he can transform. Once he's dead, run back to the door and reset the room. Upon re-entering the room, hug the right-hand side, then try to kill the left crossbowman. Once he's dead, reset the room, equip your flash grenades, hug the right-hand side, then stay close to the water on the left-hand side to avoid aggroing the enemies downstairs. Make Ashley get on the crank, run back to your cover while staying close to the water to avoid the crossbow guy and the enemies downstairs, and keep your back to Ashley. When the scythe guys spawn in, throw a flash grenade as soon as you hear one about to attack you. This should stun all the black robe scythe enemies, allowing you to run upstairs, get past the red robe scythe guy, and trigger the checkpoint. Restarting the checkpoint will despawn the enemies, allowing you to begin Ashley's double crank sequence, which I don't need to explain right now because it works as intended, unlike in the Remilk. So you can see how there's a better sense of pace and strategy with this method, and the fact that the developers gave you the passive checkpoint system whenever you go through the door and also a checkpoint at the start of Ashley's double crank sequence shows how they understand the importance of including checkpoints in these kinds of bad encounters to allow the player to not waste time dealing with poor designs and fatiguing gameplay. Old Capcom definitely had a lot more sense despite the poor designs apparent in the sequence. And I guess another way to look at Resident Evil 4 OG's water room area is the first initial section isn't done that well, but the Ashley section is done pretty well. A shame that the same can't be said with new Capcom and their take on the water room area. In Resident Evil 4 Remilk, this sequence is even more time consuming than the original version and requires an incredible amount of shotgun ammo, pistol ammo, and grenades to make it more bearable and practical to do. There are probably just as many enemies here as in the original version, but instead of tying the reinforcement mechanic to enemy deaths, they tie the reinforcements to progress through the sequence. There are more crossbow enemies this time around, and I don't know why the developers looked back at the original version and thought, oh, this sequence wasn't awkward and tedious enough. enough, so let's add more crossbow enemies. But the weird thing about the crossbow enemies is that when you obtain the wheel that lowers the staircase and start using it, they don't attack you, so you can just lower the stairs and take out the crossbow guys with the shotgun when you get up to their level. It makes me wonder why there are as many of them if their AI can be deactivated temporarily. I guess I should be grateful given that I don't have to waste so much time shooting at the crossbow enemies with the flimsy focus reticle system on the pistol. Ashley's AI is also a nuisance as she constantly walks around getting in your way when you're trying to shoot enemies with a shotgun or when you're trying to bait enemies to sprint so that you can shoot them. And if you shoot her, it's inconsistent whether she gets incapacitated or killed. Once again, why do the developers not favor common sense and let you leave Ashley in a safe area so that she doesn't get in the way of the combat? Why are the developers trying to shove it in your face constantly that they revel in this wonderful achievement in AI stupidity, like they're trying to achieve a world record? How alien in thought could they possibly be? But to talk about the enemies, there are essentially 3 groups of zealots on the ground in the following order. The first group that attacks you, the enemies on the bottom level, and the enemies that spawn in after lowering the first staircase. The first group only has 1 shield guy that can transform. The second group has all but 1 or 2 enemies transforming. Then I believe the third group has only 2 or 3 enemies that transform. Bear all this in mind when approaching the sequence. To discuss the general strategy, at the start you'll want to take out the 2 crossbow enemies before starting the sequence. Once you start the sequence, you'll either want to fall back to the previous room or hug the left-hand side, avoid being stunned by the enemy sprinting, hope Ashley doesn't get grabbed, jump down here, then start using your shotgun to kill the enemies as they drop down to your level. The latter should only be done if you have a lot of shotgun ammo. For the first approach, if you run back to the previous room, you can use your shotgun as well, but you run the risk of enemies throwing their weapons. You can also make the enemies leash when you go past a certain threshold, then shoot the enemies in the leg while they're sprinting to use knife executions or melee attacks on them. The leashing can also be used to isolate the enemies that go for Ashley, as they're usually the first ones to enter the room once they detect you're back in the playable area, given that they don't hesitate in their sprint animation. This approach to the first group can take a while to do, but can be viable for saving up on ammunition. For the second approach, where you opt to run past the enemies on the left-hand side, then jump down, one of the things that can be a problem is Leon's inability to stop reloading his shotgun. For some reason, there's no way to stop Leon from reloading his shotgun so that you can immediately deal with approaching enemies. Every other game has this mechanic, yet not Resident Evil 4 Remilk. There is a chance that you can swap weapons to cancel the reload animation, but it's inconsistent with whether it works or not, so you may have to fall back a slight distance without alerting the second group of enemies in order to account for the first group potentially ganging up on you. The other thing that can be a problem with this method is that the last 3 to 4 enemies can be delayed with getting to this spot for some reason. You know you're dealing with the last couple of enemies when this female ganado with the torch is accompanying them. Make sure you keep track of them to be sure you've eliminated them. The last problem is that the headshots can be very inconsistent with whether they decapitate enemies or not, so you might use up more shotgun ammo than necessary. By the way, whenever the enemies are in the middle of dropping down, you can actually trigger a wall-bound stun animation by hitting them with the shotgun at a certain point in the drop-down animation. You're essentially knocking them against the floor that they're jumping down from, so they'll be in that wall-bound stun animation while they're falling. This can be useful in saving up on shotgun ammo and for potentially bypassing transformations. That being said, the detection on the wall bounce can be kinda sporadic at times, and when there are multiple enemies, doing this wall bounce method can be risky. Once the first group has been dealt with, you need to shoot this zealot to only get 3 guys coming after you. Deal with them, shoot this zealot, do the suplex method, then stab her. Do the same with the next guy coming up. Remember, a vast majority of the enemies on this level can transform, so focus on doing knife executions. Once they're dead, you can shoot this crossbow zealot up top, grab the wheel, place it in the slot, and deal with the crossbow zealot and shield zealot that spawn. Turn the wheel to lower the staircase, go up the staircase to spawn the third group of enemies, then go back down. Deal with the side zealot that goes for Ashley, then try to group the other 2 enemies to kill them with the explosive barrel. There will also be 1 zealot that grabs and a torch zealot, but they're very slow to come and get you for some reason, so be careful. Once they're dead, use the wheel to lower the next set of stairs. This will pause the crossbow zealots until you get off. Avoid the crossbows while you're going up the stairs, then use your shotgun on the crossbow men on both sides. You don't need to worry about the one that's furthest away. This ends the first part of this time-consuming sequence, but this is not the worst part of it, because we now have the double switch sequence as Ashley. Remember when I mentioned you need a lot of pistol ammo, shotgun ammo, and grenades? This is why. This is one of the most insufferable parts of Resident Evil 4 Remilk, and you can easily see Ashley's crappy AI on full display here. Let me make another comparison here. In Resident Evil 4 OG, Ashley is actively going for the cranks. She doesn't care that there are enemies near her. She is hyper-focused on going for the switches to contribute to actual progress of the sequence and good game design. Anytime she got grabbed by the enemies, it only takes one shot to make the enemy let her go because of common sense. The enemy is preoccupied with something else. They're not focused on you. They're not tightening up their defenses. And it's realistic feedback between the bullet and the enemy. Not to mention, the ridiculous sway on Leon's pistol is made tolerable by the choice of feedback. You had many ground enemies attacking you, and only a handful of enemies going after Ashley. If you made Ashley go for this lever, this would allow you to take up a strategic position to knock the ground enemies in the water, which contributed to the good designs at play in this section. Everything in this section screams common sense, good design, and an understanding of Resident Evil 4 OG systems. In Resident Evil 4 Remilk, it's a complete 180 in quality. It is mandatory that you have at least 120 pistol bullets, 10 shotgun shells, and 1 flash grenade because the justifications for saving up on this much ammo are due to poor designs and poor decisions with Ashley's AI. You have to deal with 6 ground enemies in total while a whole mob of enemies swarm Ashley. Ashley is completely idiotic in this sequence. Whenever she's trying to get to the second crank, if any enemies are near her, she just refuses to move, even when the enemies aren't necessarily in front of her. And the distance the enemy has to be from her in order to make her cower is greater than you think. If Ashley can run past enemies to try to keep up with you if you're far from her, why doesn't she run past the enemies in the sequence? She doesn't even try to maneuver around them or anything. And it doesn't help that Ashley chooses to walk instead of run during the sequence. The enemies gang up around her so easily, and when they do grab her, you have to hit them so many times to get them to drop her. It looks so comical and stupid the way they just shrug off bullets. They can even shrug off shots from high-powered weapons like the sniper rifle. And when you're dealing with that alongside the focus reticle system, the projectile-based nature of the bullets, the awkwardness involved with trying to shoot enemies when they're moving sideways, and Ashley flailing around while an enemy is holding on to her, it leads to an incredibly frustrating section that makes you wonder why you can't just tell Ashley to come back down to the ground level so that you can clear out the enemies, then send her up. In Resident Evil 5, during the final liquor encounter, you could tell your AI partner to come back down if you sent them up to the top level. So why not here if Ashley is going to be as high maintenance and useless as she is? And why do they put so many enemies up top? There's no justification for this, especially given the numerous problems with the regular Ganados, despite the fact that in this sequence, the enemies that go after Ashley have less health and die in about 4 headshots. And I can't help but feel like the developers knew they made an incredibly stupid section built around a nonsensical, broken, and comical stun system with the enemies who grab Ashley and also with the other enemies, because they always make the Zealots take Ashley to the furthest enemy spawn point, even when they're standing next to the other spawn point. I mean, just look at these moments. How can you not shake your head at how stupid this looks with enemies ganging up on Ashley? She's just standing there like an idiot, and I'm just shooting them repeatedly while they're comically shrugging off my shots and taking turns picking up Ashley. Or look at this moment where Ashley refuses to move even though the enemies aren't in front of her. Or this moment where the enemy is right next to the spawn point and they just pick up Ashley and take her to the other spawn point. I've never seen anything so retarded and badly conceptualized in my entire life. But to talk about the general strategy, when you boost Ashley up, you need to only kill the first 3 enemies. The ground reinforcements spawn in whenever you kill 4 enemies or whenever Ashley finishes the first crank. Once those 3 enemies are dead, you need to go to this spot, use your shotgun to kill the 2 enemies that spawn, then kill the other shield guy. While you're doing this, Ashley will be grabbed, so you need to immediately start shooting the Zealot who has Ashley with your pistol once you've dealt with the ground enemies. You'll still want to remain in this general area because at a certain point, while you're shooting the Zealots up top, more reinforcements will spawn in. As soon as they spawn in, you need to deal with them the same way you dealt with the first set of reinforcements. It's important that you're fast when getting rid of the reinforcements because Ashley will be dangerously close to being kidnapped. This is why the flash grenade is needed, so that you don't deal with the lazily designed stun systems on the enemies. At that point, it's just a matter of clearing out the Zealots up top until they stop spawning. Bear in mind, whenever Ashley gets close to the second crank, a Zealot will sprint out of the closest spawn point together, so be ready for him. Once he's dealt with, Ashley should be able to fully turn the crank, which ends this appalling and badly designed sequence. But I'm sure you can understand now why this is a complete 180 from the original version of this section. In Resident Evil 4 OG, the first section was bad but quick, but Ashley's section was great. In Resident Evil 4 Remilk, the first section is okay but time-consuming, but Ashley's section is a complete disaster. It's absolutely unbelievable that they think the way this black liquid area is designed is acceptable. What a joke.